have a short background of President Corazon Aquino. Now, President Corazon Aquino was responsible in delivering a speech in the United States Congress, and that was 3 years after she returned to our country, go back to the US, but not as an ordinary citizen, but already as president of the Philippines. Now, there were some information that speaks that the speech of President Corazon Aquino before the US Congress was written by Teddy Boy Locsin. And who was the Teddy Boy Locsin? He was currently the Secretary of Foreign Affairs under the Duterte administration. To look at the short background of President Corazon Aquino, in full name, she was Maria Corazon Cory Somolong Cuangco, and she became an Aquino when she married former Senator Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. As mentioned a while ago, she was the 11th president of the Philippines and was also the first woman to become president of the country. The second woman to become president was Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. She was a plain housewife, but in some twist of fate, she became president of our country. She was a prominent figure of the 1986 EDSA People Power Revolution that ended the 20-year presidency of President Ferdinand Marcos. And how did that happen? It's all because of the death of Ninoy on August 21, 1983. Why? There was one time wherein Ninoy, together with the other prominent figures during the time of the martial law, were arrested. If we are going to check later the speech of Corazon Aquino, she mentioned Ninoy undergone several ordeals, and he was able to what? He was able to face those ordeals. But apart from that, there were also some information that states that Ninoy Aquino was granted by President Marcos the chance to go to the United States for a medical checkup. The government during that time was expecting that Ninoy Aquino would not return anymore, but that's what the government thinks until Ninoy Aquino returned to the country on August 21, 1983. Now, there were some people also that states that Ninoy Aquino returned because Marcos was already ailing during that time. Marcos also had a disease, and it seems that his health was no longer good. That's why there were some. I'm not saying that it's generally the idea or the history, but just coming from other people also, it's like speculations. Now there were some who which states that he needs to return to the country so that if whatever would happen to Marcos, then he is here in the country ready to take over if there will be a particular election that would happen or other incidents that may cause for him to become a possible successor of Marcos. But of course, that was not the case, because when he came or when he arrived to the country, he was assassinated. He died. She became the leader of the opposition. And when President Marcos tried to check if the people are wants Marcos to become president, Marcos asked or called for a snap election. That was on February 7, 1986. And what happened was Corazon Aquino joined the race for the presidency with Salvador Laurel as vice president. And of course, they are expecting that they will be the winners. They will be winning because based on the NAMPREL tally, the NAMPREL is a non-governmental organization that counter-checks the work of the Commission on Election. Based on the NAMFREL tally, it seems that Corazon Aquino and Salvador Laurel were leading. However, what happened was when the result of the election was turned over to the Batasang Pambansa, who was given the constitutional right to canvass the election returns as well as to declare the winning president, what happened was it was the Batasang Pambansa proclaimed Marcos and Arturo Tolentino the running mate of Marcos that became uh, the winners. They were the ones that were proclaimed as the winners. That's why Corazon Aquino called for civil disobedience from February 7 until it all started in February 22. The disobedience started on February 22, 1986. And that's why the date of the EDSA People Power Revolution is from February 2 until February 25. It culminated in February 25. But what happened is from February 22, there were already people coming from the or going out of the streets, joining the rally. But the culminating event happened on February 25, 1986, when there were defections coming from the armed forces of the Philippines. And who are these people who defected from Marcos? Meaning they were actually loyal officials of Marcos, but they turned down or they became or they betrayed Marcos in that particular sense. These are, of course, we have there Fidel Ramos, the vice chief of staff during the time, and the other one was Juan Ponce Enrile. Now, these were the two people who defected from Marcos and who supported Corazon Aquino. Depictions made by the members of the armed forces of the Philippines with the support coming from the Roman Catholic Church, which was during the time headed by Jaime Cardinal Sin. What happened was the People Power Revolution became successful. You know, February 25 actually is very significant also. Why? Because during that time, we have two presidents taking their oath of office. Corazon Aquino was taking her oath of office in Club San Juan Green Hills, and while in the case of Marcos, he was taking his oath of office in Malacanang. But in the evening of that, Marcos went out of no, what happened is Marcos went out of Malacanang and transferred to another place. There was even a story on that. I don't know if the story is true, but when the Americans, there were American officials who came to Marcos and asked him to move out of Malacanang, they asked him, "Where would you like to stay?" Then Marcos replied, "Poway." But what happened was the Americans brought Marcos to Hawaii. Of course, Poway is in Ilocos Norte. Hawaii is a territory or another state of the U.S. But that's just a story. I don't know if that's true. But that's what happened. Now, Corazon Aquino was able to secure the presidency after the EDSA People Power Revolution on February 25, 1986. 7 months after that, Corazon Aquino went to the United States and she delivered her first address in the joint session of the United States Congress. Now, this is the document that we are going to evaluate this afternoon. We will be looking into the speech that was delivered by President Corazon Aquino before the United States Congress uh, 7 months after she came into power by a popular revolt. Now, her address also gives us an idea of her future goals as president of the Philippines and the kind of relationship that she wants to establish with the United States of America. Okay? Now, this was delivered on September 18, 1986. 1986. Now, Cory Aquino, as I mentioned a while ago, together with her husband, they stayed husband and children like Chris Aquino, Benigno Aquino the third, Noynoy Aquino, and the others. They they stayed in the U.S. for several years. But of course, as I mentioned a while ago, there was a time wherein, that's in August 1983, when Ninoy Aquino cannot just sit there in the US trying to look at what is happening or waiting for the things that would happen to the Philippines. That's why uh, he made a decision, and the decision was to go back and return to the Philippines. Now, but of course, the bad thing there that happened was Ninoy Aquino was killed. In the death of Ninoy Aquino, what happened was Corazon Aquino need to return also to the country. But the time we're in, she's going to go back to the Philippines was the time that she's going to bury her husband, Ninoy Aquino. Okay? Now, 3 years after that, uh, she returned to the United States, and when she returned to the United States, she's no longer an ordinary plain housewife, but she was already the president of the Philippines. And of course, she tended to describe herself as president of a free people. Why free? From whom they were freed? Obviously, the answer is they were freed from the dictatorship of Marcos. Now, according to her, when they buried Ninoy, the whole nation honored him by that brave, selfless act of giving honor to a nation in shame recovered its own. Meaning, the death of Ninoy actually was significant in recovering the shame that has been brought to our country. And by that, the death of Ninoy becomes or I mean, because of that, Ninoy is being honored by the Filipino people for the brave and selfless act that he gives also to our country. Now, there, in that particular sense also, we could see the one of the most famous lines of Corazon Aquino. In giving, we receive; in losing, we find; and out of defeat, we snatch our victory. That's the opposing things. When you give, you receive something. When you lose anything, you find a new thing. But when you experience defeat, there is a corresponding victory. For me, the significance of Ninoy was that he became a pleasing sacrifice for the prayers of the Filipino people for freedom. It was the death of Ninoy Aquino that gives the Philippines freedom. Now, of course, on her part and as well as on the part of her own children, Ninoy was considered to be a loving husband and a father. Now, there were several, and she narrated that there were several times that they lost him, and those times were considered to be deep and painful one. Okay. Now, of course, in this part, all the lesson or the speech, Corazon Aquino narrated all those things that were made by President Marcos. She labeled Marcos as a dictator and a traitor to his own oath. Now, why was Marcos considered as a dictator and a traitor? Because he suspended the constitution, and if a government is being run not within the bounds of the constitution, then you are considered to be a dictator. And another one is he shut down the Congress, the Congress that is the same as the Congress wherein she was delivering the speech, the Congress of the United States of America. But of course, for others, this could be justified. Others would not label Marcos as dictator, but instead they would label Marcos as constitutional authoritarian. Why constitutional authoritarian? Because all the actions of he did not actually suspend. I mean, maybe the reference here of the suspension of the constitution that was made by President Corazon Aquino was on the 1935 constitution. But in the case of Marcos, he was governing the country based on the 1973 constitution, and all his actions are being supported by the constitution. But obviously, it's because that Marcos during that time could do whatever he want with the constitution. He could replace the constitution anytime he wants. That's why the 1973 constitution was amended for mga six times just to fit the the time, or just to fit the needs of President Marcos. Okay, but apart from suspending the constitution and shutting down the Congress, uh, Corazon Aquino mentioned that her husband was detained along with thousands of others, and all those people who spoke against democracy are being arrested. Their end drew near. But in the case of Ninoy Aquino, he suffered a long and cruel ordeal, but through, of course, within uh, the regime of Marcos. Now, why? Because according to her, the dictator already knew that Ninoy was not a mere body to be imprisoned, but a spirit that must be break. Uh, of course, President Marcos, according to her, the dictatorship demolished one by one the institutions of democracy, the press, the Congress, the independence of a judiciary, the protection of the Bill of Rights, but the dictatorship cannot demolish the spirit that is alive in Ninoy Aquino. That's why Ninoy Aquino must be stopped, and that could be done only by extinguishing Ninoy Aquino. Now, there were several ordeals that were experienced by Ninoy during that time. Among this, of course, he was locked up in a tiny cell. He was stripped up naked, and he was even threatened to be undergoing a sudden midnight execution. But Ninoy held up manly under all of it. Uh, for 43 days, the authorities, according to Corazon Aquino, would not tell her what happened to Ninoy. And they felt that they lost Ninoy. But of course, though those things being done by the government did not work for Ninoy. That's why what they did was he put him again on trial for subversion, murder, and host of other crimes before a military commission. But all of those things were endured by Ninoy Aquino until, of course, until the time that he was assassinated. There was a period wherein some even would contemplate that Ninoy should make already peace with the Marcos. They were contemplating what if Ninoy would make peace with Marcos. But what was the reason why Ninoy did not make peace with Marcos? The answer there was because the spirit of democracy could not be allowed to die. There must be democracy always. The rule of the people must always prevail. That's why even though there were times that Ninoy was contemplating to make peace, or there were some people who are asking Ninoy to make peace with Marcos, he did not do that because according to Corazon Aquino, the spirit of democracy should not die. Of course, that particular end during the time when Ninoy Aquino was assassinated. But the assassination of Ninoy Aquino did not went into vain. Why? Because his death, according to Corazon Aquino, was my country's resurrection and the courage and faith by which alone they could be free again. Now, that idea was actually the main reason why the death of Ninoy Aquino didn't went in vain. Because of the death of Ninoy Aquino, the courage of the people and the faith of the people that they will be free again was resurrected among the people. Now that's why, because of the death of Ninoy Aquino, the task had fallen on the shoulders of Corazon Aquino to continue offering the democratic alternative to the people. So that particular part of the speech was actually, it was like a quoted portion coming from Archibald MacLeish. Now, Corazon Aquino quoted that democracy must be defended by arms. Try to remember, Ninoy Aquino died because he wanted democracy to be experienced by the people. He wanted that the goal of the people to have democracy back I mean, that was the primary aim of Ninoy Aquino, and that was also the reason why he died, and that was also the reason why Corazon Aquino took on her shoulders the task of continuing the cause of Ninoy Aquino, because he wanted also to offer the people another democratic alternative. And Corazon Aquino quoted this: democracy must be defended by arms when it is attacked by arms, and it must be defended by truth when it is attacked by lies. But according to her, Archibald MacLeish failed to say how should it be won. Meaning, MacLeish tried to mention how democracy must be defended, but MacLeish did not mention how democracy shall be won. That's why Corazon Aquino gave an answer to that. I held fast to Ninoy's conviction that it must be by the ways of democracy. Therefore, democracy could only be won by the ways also of democracy. Okay, that's how, or that's the answer to the question: how shall democracy be won? That follows the conviction of Ninoy Aquino. That's why, in order for Corazon Aquino to win, uh, to win democracy using the ways of democracy, she participated in the 1984 election that was called by Marcos, even if she knew that it would be rigged. Now, there were several lawyers from the opposition that warned her warned her the grave risk of legitimizing the foregone results of the election that were clearly going to be fraudulent. Those lawyers told her that if you are going to join in the election that will be called by Marcos, it seems that you are legitimizing the result of the election that we know would become fraudulent. We know that would be full of cheating. But according to Corazon Aquino, she was not fighting for lawyers. She was fighting for the people in whose intelligence she had an implicit faith. Now, because according to her, by the exercise of democracy, even under the dictatorship of Marcos, these people would be prepared for democracy when it came. Now, and also, it was the only way that Corazon Aquino could measure the power, even in the terms, could measure how she could face the dictatorship even within the terms dictated by the dictator. Now that's why, even though some of her supporters did not allow her, or did not want to join, did not want that she would join in the election, she did, because she wanted to test democracy by ways of, or by the terms being given by the dictator. Now, of course, the people vindicated her in the election marked by government thuggery and fraud. The opposition swept the elections, garnering majority of the votes, even if they ended up barely having a third of the seats in the Batasang Pambansa because of the corrupt Commission on Elections, which means that they almost won the election. However, the corruption, or the cheating that was used by the Commission on Election allowed them only a third of the seats in the parliament. Now, that give her an idea of her possible means to face the to face President Marcos. That's why it was mentioned there. Uh, After that, in 1986, or a year before that, uh, the dictator or Marcos called for a snap election. And that snap election that Marcos called actually called for its own doom. Now, the people obliged because of the election, and there were a million signatures drafted that called for her to join the or to challenge Marcos. And of course, she obliged. And the rest of that was, according to her, the rest of that was history. Now, of course, in the election, in the snap election of 1986, she mentioned that democracy was manifested in that election. According to Corazon Aquino, democracy was manifested when you saw men, when you saw people armed with courage and integrity stand against threats and corruption. That was particularly when women poll watchers, even though they were armed goons that crushed the polling places to steal the ballots. The women poll watchers are there. They tied themselves to the ballot boxes. There were also people that were committed to democracy by preparing themselves, by preparing to give their lives for its pale imitation. And of course, at the end of the day, before another wave of fraud could distort the results, Corazon Aquino announced the people's victory. Now, if you could see there, uh, based on the result of the NAMPREL, it was Corazon Aquino and Salvador Laurel that is winning the presidency and the vice presidency. That's why Corazon Aquino thanked the United States, because they were able to see the process in the process that is happening in the country. There was even one who reported that he was a witness to an extraordinary manifestation of democracy on the part of the Filipino people. However, that thing was not in consonance with what is being expected by Corazon Aquino. Why? Because the Batasang Pambansa announced the victory of Marcos. Now, because the Batasang Pambansa announced the victory of Marcos, the people turned out in the streets and proclaimed Corazon Aquino as president. And of course, apart from that, there were some handful military leaders who declared themselves against the dictatorship. I think I mentioned that a while ago. There was Fidel Ramos and Juan Ponce Enrile, who defected from Marcos, who betrayed Marcos and transferred their allegiance to or loyalty to Corazon Aquino, which became significant, which became important in the success of its people power revolution. That's why, according to Corazon Aquino, it is on that faith and the obligation it entails that I assume the presidency. And she came to power peacefully. Therefore, she's going to keep that promise, or to keep that power peacefully, which is considered to be a contract that she has with the people, as well as her commitment to God. Now, during her time, there was the restoration of full constitutional government, and it proves that democracy could be restored, or democracy could be restored by ways of democracy. A new constitutional structure is being implemented in the new democracy through another constitution, or a new constitution, wherein in that new constitution there are provisions pertaining to the full respect of the Bill of Rights, and there were independent constitutional commissions that were included in the new constitution. Now, Corazon Aquino also gives several reasons why Marcos set aside democracy. And according to her, Marcos set aside democracy to save democracy itself from communist insurgency. But what was the result? This communist insurgency that less than 500, uh, what happened to that is it had grown to more than 16,000 by the time Marcos fled. That's why the lesson, according to her, is to uh, think. Uh, the lesson is about trying to stifle a thing with a means by which it grows. That's why she was also trying to address the insurgency in the country. She wanted to bring down or to bring down insurgents from the hills, and that could be done only by political initiatives and local reintegration programs that includes economic progress and justice. And of course, as president of the free people, she, according to her, she will not betray peace by which she came to power, and she will not allow insurgent leaders to spurn out the offer for peace. She would also offer peace to those who wanted to return to go back to the fold of the government. However, according to her, if this peace that she was offering to the insurgents will not become feasible, then she was also ready to take up the sword of war. Okay? Now, uh, like Abraham Lincoln, according to her, she stand that force may be necessary before mercy. Like Lincoln, however, she don't release it, yet she will do whatever it takes to defend the integrity and freedom of the country. Now, she needs also to mention or give assurance on the debts of the country. Paano na ang utang sa Pilipinas? Now, by that, according to her, she is going to honor the country's debt. But the ways on which these debts could be paid, then it's up to the government to do that. But she mentioned that uh, ours must have been the cheapest revolution ever. But because there is little help from others. But of course, she needs to fulfill the first and most difficult condition of the death negotiation. The revolution or the EDSA people revolution is a cheap revolution, but since we owe other countries debts, the first and most difficult condition for that debt negotiation is the full restoration of democracy and responsible government. Now, she also mentions about her meeting with President Ronald Reagan, and she also mentioned her campaigns, the campaigns that she made, particularly in the slum area or impoverished village. And there, she was able to see and notice the cry of the people. According to her, these people came to me with one cry, and that was democracy. Not food, although they clearly needed it, but democracy. Not work, although they surely wanted it, but democracy. That's why, according to her, the people deserve what we call democracy. They didn't expect me to work a miracle that would instantly put food into their mouths, clothes on their back, education put in their children, and give them work that will put dignity in their lives. But I feel the pressing obligation to respond quickly as the leader of the people, so deserving of all these things. Okay? Now, of course, you could also see there the strategies in which Corazon Aquino should face the insurgents, particularly the idea of where did half of the country's export earnings go. And if we are going to check that, according to her, half of the country's export earnings go to just that go to pay just the interest on a debt whose benefit the Filipino people never received. Now, all those things that were mentioned by Corazon Aquino culminates with the question that she asked with the Americans. Has there been a greater test of national commitment to the ideals you hold dear than my people have gone through? Now, and after asking that question, he implored the Americans to join the Filipino people to build a new home for democracy, another haven for the oppressed, so that it may stand as a shining testament of the Philippines and the United Nations commitment to freedom. Now, if we are going to look at the totality of the speech of Corazon Aquino, it mentions significant information pertaining to her life. The time we're in, she almost lost Ninoy Aquino, and the time that she actually lost she lost him, and all the other reasons that lead her to become president of the country. She also mentioned the kind of policies that she wants to implement with the insurgency that was happening to our country also, the kind of policy that she is going to implement in relation to the foreign debts of our country, and the kind of obligation or the obligation that she wants to give to the people. Now, those are the things that were mentioned in the speech of Corazon Aquino.